OpenAI and Microsoft drop their AGI clause. Google signs a deal with the Pentagon amidst backlash, and a cursor agent deleted a production database on its own. Those stories and more on this week's AI Recap. I'm Matt Kuda. Let's dive in. All right, first story we're covering is how Microsoft and OpenAI restructured their deal. To set the context, Microsoft has invested over $13 billion since 2019 into OpenAI, getting exclusive IP rights to OpenAI's tech, on the condition that OpenAI had to use Azure, Microsoft's cloud platform, exclusively. And in turn, Microsoft got a 20% revenue share up to about $100 billion. The deal had a constraint that if OpenAI reached AGI, which was defined as generating $100 billion in profit, then that contract would be breached and there would be no further IP rights to Microsoft from that point. And these IP rights were originally through 2030. But in this new deal, that AGI clause has been dropped. The IP license has been extended to 2032, non-exclusive, and OpenAI is able to ship on different cloud platforms other than Azure. And just 3 days later, after this contract was set in stone, OpenAI landed on AWS Bedrock with its models, codecs, and other managed agents. OpenAI clearly wanted more compute, and the Microsoft CFO confirmed that Azure has constraints in this regard, so this is a flexibility play and a pressure on compute. My take on this is that both companies kind of realized that this clause for reaching AGI was far out of the timeline. Obviously, AGI is a lot of hype in the AI news sphere. So this being in a contract, kind of defining how each company can operate within each other, didn't really make sense as this deal was wrote in 2023. It's now 2026. Who knows when AGI is coming, but this deal makes it feel like it's further out than initially thought. The clause was holding both sides back and from competing from each other, so it's a win-win. And now that OpenAI has access to more compute outside of Microsoft, it will be interesting to see how their models improve and what capabilities they're able to ship with this new abundance. The next story is Big Tech reported its earnings this week. The combined 2026 AI capex was from Microsoft, Google, Meta, and Amazon. It's now tracking between $650 and $700 billion. This is larger than the GDP of most countries. Absolutely crazy. Going through some numbers, Microsoft's revenue was about $83 billion, plus 18% year over year, with its AI run rate over $37 billion. Alphabet, Google's parent company's revenue was almost $110 billion. Google Cloud being $20 billion of that, growing 63%. Meta's revenue was $56.3 billion, with its capex raised to between $125 and $145 billion. Its ad business is increasing by 33% year over year. Amazon's net sales was $181 billion, plus 17%. Now, revenue is up across the board, but it begs the question whether this is keeping pace with the spend hike. All these companies are looking to improve their models, which, as we just discussed, requires compute. So a lot of them are running negative just to get a slice of the pie in the AI market and keep up in research in the race with other companies, but they're blowing a lot of cash. It's worth noting that Google's cloud growth that I mentioned is the one green flag in this and actually convincing some investors that the math is working out. They're making more money there while also investing in AI. But the main signal I'm taking away from this is that Microsoft saying it's capacity constrained at $190 billion per year tells you that the demand for these AI products is still ahead of supply. So AI revenue is scaling with the spend, just not at the same overall speed. Next up is the spiciest story, in my opinion, of the week. It's Google's new deal with the Pentagon. On April 27th, Google signed a Pentagon deal letting the Department of Defense use Google AI on classified work for, quote, any lawful government purpose. Now, if you recall, these are the same terms that OpenAI and xAI agreed to earlier this year in February, and Anthropic refused and got hit with a Pentagon supply chain risk designation. Now, I went through a couple articles on this, and the contract language is the story here. Per the information, models are, quote, not intended for and should not be used for domestic mass surveillance or autonomous weapons, but the contract does not confer any right to control or veto lawful government operational decision making. So Charlie Bullock on X noted that the should not be used for is not the same as shall not or will not. It's very ambiguous language there. Should not imposes no obligation on the Pentagon to not use the models for those evil things. Now, many Google engineers and people at DeepMind, Google's AI lab, spoke out against this quick pivot. Andreas Kirch said here that I'm speechless at Google signing a deal to use our AI models for classified tasks. Frankly, it is shameful. He had a whole Twitter thread. And I honestly side with him here. You know, you're put at the forefront of this AI lab. You're leading it. Google's principles were set in stone. They weren't going to work with the AI government to carry out these controversial tasks. And then, bam, just like that, they flip the switch. All your work and the principles you thought you were aligning with are now out the window. And now you're giving the government access to your models to do basically whatever they want with it, going against any morals or principles you have on where AI should interfere and not. So now pretty much Anthropic stands alone on this, on not working with the American government. It's worth watching whether this leads to resignations from DeepMind, what more engineers will say. And speaking of Anthropic, their valuation is surpassing OpenAI's. On April 29th, they confirmed that they're in talks for a $50 billion round at a $900 billion valuation, which would surpass OpenAI's $852 billion valuation from March. Anthropic's valuation arc is kind of crazy. They were at $61 billion last March, $183 billion this past September, $380 billion in February, 3 months ago, and now they're at $900 billion. It's crazy growth. Their ARR was at $9 billion at the end of 2025, and now it's at $30 billion, so roughly 3x in 4 months. Amazing growth. And you see a lot of other companies investing in Anthropic, allowing them to get this valuation. Amazon invested $8 billion with a $25 billion compute commitment plus 5 gigawatts. Google up to $40 billion plus another 5 gigawatts. Both these hyperscalers are now backing Anthropic. They have the compute. And also you see a lot of talent moving to Anthropic. I saw this tweet thread of all these like CTOs of other companies moving to members of technical staff at Anthropic. Like the Canvas CTO just quit this past week to go to Anthropic. This guy lists some other CTOs like Workday, Instagram CTO. So clearly these people in high positions with a lot of knowledge on the industry are moving to Anthropic, so they have the talent to back this high valuation. But the counterpoint is OpenAI still crushes in its consumer market. OpenAI has 900 million weekly active users on ChatGPT. Anthropic has nothing close to that on consumer. So if consumer becomes the meaningful battleground for enterprise depth, it might not save Anthropic. But for now, this could be the lead change that sticks. I mean, I personally love Anthropic models for coding and even for my more like research and planning tasks. I love Anthropic. I see the same sentiment online too, and clearly a lot of other smart people are believing in them as well. And the last story of the week, it's a fun one. You got to end on a fun one. It's the story of how a cursor agent wiped out this SaaS's production database. This occurred on April 24th at the company Pocket OS. They're a SaaS for car rental companies. They handle reservations, payments, stuff like that. So the engineer was using Cursor on Cloud Opus 4.6 with a Railway infrastructure to host the APIs. The agent was working on a staging database, couldn't access it, and decided on its own to fix it by deleting the Railway volume. So when hunting for an API key in the database, it found one in an unrelated file, but this API key essentially had God permissions, could access prod, staging, and then the agent, without permission, without saying a heads up, ran a single curl to Railway's delete endpoint and wiped the entire production database. And the customer impact was 90 days of operations data was wiped. The Pocket OS staff spent the whole weekend rebuilding the database manually using Stripe payment histories and email logs. That must have been a crazy weekend. Founder Jer Crane wrote a whole article on what happened here. It was pretty funny. And so when he asked the agent after he did that what happened, the agent said, "I violated every principle I was given. I guessed instead of verifying. I ran a destructive action without being asked. I didn't understand what I was doing." Even though the system prompt said never effing guess in all caps. I mean, there's a lot of lessons to take away from this. Token scope, number one, don't have admin tokens in your database. Two, blast radius, set up containers for what your agents can operate in. And three, endpoint design, don't allow a single curl command to wipe everything. Personally, I've never seen something so destructive using Claude Code. I know a lot of people are back on the cursor bandwagon, but something to monitor if you're a developer. So that will do it for this week's recap. The AI world is insane. There's a ton of new stories every week. That's exactly what we cover on this channel. So make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next one. If you learned anything, you're obligated to like the video. This has been Matt Kuda. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.